we've learned. You got two different groups are disagreeing and they bring with each other, so they bring Jesus in on the scene. Jesus, instead of taking sides, he comes up with a third way. Comes up with a different way of looking at things. Now listen, someone has said this, is Jesus far left or he's far right? He's far out. And someone said that. Now I don't know how Jesus looks at things except through his word. And that's how Christians need to look at things. So we need to look at things in general. And the backdrop on all of our decisions should be his word. Now I believe if it were possible to get this mic to every church, if it were possible to speak to every Christian on the face of the earth, I believe that we just need to come to this conclusion that there has to be a different way to fix our country and to fix our churches. That we need to come with some type of agreement. Now, catching some of the highlights of the Republican debate that was this past week, there were two words that caught my attention. I thought that's kind of interesting because I'm going to bring that up in a couple of weeks. And the two words that were brought up in one of the questions was this: moral authority. And I thought, well, that's a good thing that we'll discuss that in a couple of weeks. And let's just look at this. This is what we've learned. If I could look at our politics through the filter of faith, rather than the other way around. I'm not going to condemn a Democrat or Republican or a libertarian or a socialist or a Tea Party. I'm not here to condemn. If we could just look at our politics through the filter of our faith, then perhaps we might be able to find a way to recover from where we are. Even though this past week, there was a 144-page bill that was passed, and it was a finance bill that was passed by our Congress, and 144 pages that contained over the next 2 years over $80 billion in increased spending, and that averages out to over $580 million a page. That don't sound like recovery to me. But that did get my attention as I look at those things. I said, what are you men and women thinking about? Well, let's just look and see what God's Word says. I got to look at these situations through the filters of my faith. What does God have to say about it? Now, there's a book in the Old Testament. The book is called Nehemiah. We're going to spend some time in that book in the next few weeks. And this is interesting. This particular book, there is a lesson, a huge lesson in this story, in this book, in this story that we're going to start this morning, that each and every one of us can learn. Now, in this book, there's no miracles. In this book, nothing supernatural. In this book, God never speaks. Angels don't appear. It's interesting. But yet, this is a story that I believe there's a principle found in this book. If this principle could be applied somehow to this church, to every Christian's life, it is unreal the impact it would have. If, and I stress that word if, because that decision is left up to us. Now let me just kind of lay some groundwork, because to be honest with you, today basically the message is trying to just lay some groundwork to try to get us familiar with what Nehemiah is all about. So let's talk about this. Okay, around 586 BC, you've heard the name Nebuchadnezzar. Now keep in mind, he happened to be the king of Babylon. He happened to be the king of Babylon. And during that particular year, he invaded the nation of Israel. Not only did he invade the nation of Israel, but he also took over the city of Jerusalem and destroyed the Temple of Solomon. And took a lot of artifacts and took a lot of folks back to Babylon with him. Now, for those of you that grew up in church, you remember Daniel and the lion's den. You remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay, that's during this time period. Now, quickly, let's fast forward 50 years. Boom, there we are. Well, as I fast forward 50 years, I find this out. Babylon is not, the kingdom of Babylon does not exist anymore. Another kingdom has come in and taken it over, has become more powerful than the nation or the kingdom of Babylon. It's called the Medes-Persian Empire. And the Persians were very powerful people. And here we find a guy by the name of King Cyrus now is in charge. Now, King Cyrus does this. He looks around. He sees all these foreigners that are in his land. Because previously, Babylon went out, and wherever they captured a nation, they always took captives and brought them back to Babylon. Now he's in charge and looks around at all these foreigners, and he says, I don't say this to be disrespectful, I'm just going to say to be honest. They become an economic burden to us. Hello? Ring a bell? We need to send them on home. And so he sends all these foreigners toward the house. As a matter of fact, he sent 50,000 Jews back to the nation of Israel. Now, if you read the letter, if you read the book of Ezra, now this is what this is all about. In the book of Ezra, this is the first group that goes back under, and the guy that's in charge of that group, his name is Zerubbabel. And what he does, he goes back and he kind of builds up the town a little bit, but he also builds another temple. That's what he does. And as he tries to establish religious worship again, tries to get the town going again, it's kind of poor. I mean, even though the city of Jerusalem is now again the capital of Israel, it don't have any walls around it. Not only does it not have any walls around it, but they are the nation of Israel and the people of those Jews, that city, they are in great debt to all their neighbor nations. Oh, does that ring a bell with you? And the people's mood is just not what it should be. Now let's fast forward 12 years. Boom. There's another king, King Artaxerxes. That's his name. Now basically this is where the book of Nehemiah starts, right here. King Artaxerxes continues to do what King Cyrus done. He was sending the foreigners back to their original place. And you got to keep in mind, some of these folks were born in captivity. They didn't know nothing else but being right there where they were. And from their moms or dads or grandmother and grandfathers, they've heard stories about the homeland. Now, let's look. This is how Nehemiah was. Nehemiah was born in captivity. He knew nothing about Jerusalem, the homeland, except the stories that he heard. Now, who is Nehemiah? Well, Nehemiah, somewhere down the line, as he found himself to be the king's cupbearer, he was always right next to the guy that was in charge of everything. Now, I know the cupbearer generally was to taste all the things that the king was about to eat or drink. That way, in case the king was about to get poisoned, he would take the hit for him. But it was more than just that. He became a responsible man, and he had learned a lot of leadership techniques from the king himself. Nehemiah's brother is one of the boys that had went back to Jerusalem. And Nehemiah's brother one day comes back to Nehemiah and tells him what all he's found. And this is the story, and it's interesting. He says, Nehemiah, he said, I just don't know how to tell you this. And that you've heard a lot of good things about the homeland, but I'm going to tell you how it is right now. He says it's worse than what you can imagine. Nehemiah's brother had just been like Nehemiah. He was probably born in captivity too, and he'd heard all the stories about great Jerusalem and the great walls and the great gates and the great temple. And so when he gets back and he realizes this is not what it ought to be like, he comes back and says, Nehemiah, the walls are all torn down. Not only that, Nehemiah, he said the gates are burned. They're so disorganized. He said the economy is terrible. But here's the sad part. He said all the citizens there, they found themselves in slavery. And by that I mean this. They've leveraged all their houses, all their businesses. They've even used their wives and children as collateral and taken out loans just to try to make ends meet. He said it's just completely in chaos. Now, that's how it starts. And the book says this, that Nehemiah's heart was broken. He began to cry. When's the last time we wept over our nation or over our church? You know how terrible it is. When's the last time it's broken our heart to see the condition in which we find ourselves? When's the last time? And the scripture says that Nehemiah's heart was broken. Not only did he begin to weep, but he began to pray. I read this article this week. All we're interested in is the tithe because the tithe takes care of the building. Let me tell you something. The tithe may pay for the building, but prayers is what makes a church. He began to pray. And I'm going to tell you right now, since y'all been praying, since we've been praying, since you set a particular time aside, would you pray for the church? You have been, haven't you? Let's don't stop that. You've been set aside a time to pray for the church. Since we've been doing that, can't you see it? A difference? And he started praying. Now, what would a guy that, now remember, a lot of people got to go home free. He was not one of them. He was still a slave. He was still indebted to the king. He couldn't go. He was still in bondage. Not everybody got to go, but a lot of them went. He was one that didn't go. So this is what he decided to do. He began to pray that God would grant him favor with the king. That's a good if you get on the good side of the king. God, I want you to set it up where there'll become a time when I'll be able to approach King Artaxerxes and say, King, this is what I want to do. God, this is what I want you to do. That the king would let me leave my responsibility and send me back to Jerusalem and do something for my people. He had a desire to do something for his people, but he was tied up. He just couldn't go. One day, the king was in a good mood. Now, if you're going to approach the king, it's best he be in a good mood. And this is what he said. He said, I've received some news and it's broke my heart. Broke my heart. And he began to share with him what was going on back in Jerusalem. He said, this is what I want you to do. If you just give me just an extended leave of absence, and I'll come right back to you. But let me go back and take care of some things. Now notice what the king said to him. Now remember, even though Jerusalem had been set free, they still felt the weight of the nation of Persia. They felt a great deal of responsibility. As a matter of fact, even though he let people go back over in Jerusalem, Persia still held all of that land as their territory. And in parts of that territory, they would set up this person as the governor or the mayor or whatever. And they were just like little puppet kings. And Jerusalem had a puppet governor that did everything that Persia wanted. And so this is what King Artaxerxes said to Nehemiah. Nehemiah, I tell you what I'm going to do. Not only am I going to let you leave for a little while, take care of that business, so that you can kind of bring some order to the homeland, but this is what I'm going to tell you. As long as you promise to come back to me, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to set you up as governor of that territory. Not only am I going to set you up as governor, but I'm going to write you letters that as you go along the way and you pass through one little nation after another and you come across these little puppet kings that we've established over these territories, these letters are going to tell you pick up this material here, this material here, this material here, and by the time you make it to Jerusalem, you're going to have all the material that you need to rebuild that wall. What do you think? Not only that, here's a little pocket change to go along with it. Well, that's what Nehemiah does. How's he received? Nehemiah shows up in Jerusalem. Now remember, the people were already under the rule of a governor that was established by the nation of Persia. And most of these governors, just like these politicians that we have today, they might not be very wealthy when they go into office, but once they're there, the wealth begins to come in. You ever notice that? I followed some politicians this past few weeks trying to study some things on their personal wealth prior to going into political service and coming out of political service. Knowing what they are paid per year, there's no way on God's green earth can they make that much money based on their salary. Question, how did they get wealthy? Answer, a lot of deals done under the rug and behind the scenes. This is how these governors were. They were becoming wealthy. Now they're becoming wealthy, but anytime they needed something, guess what they were going to do? Oh, we're just going to tax you. You know, I've got some friends that live in Jonesboro. Guess what Jonesboro's trying to do? For what? Guess what? Now, I'm not condemning, just making a statement. That's what I do. I'm not condemning, I'm making a statement. Listen, if you run your business right, you'd have plenty of money to work with. But anyway, every time we turn around, I'm just going to tax. And so that's what these governors, previous governors did. So here comes a new governor in. The people look at Nehemiah. Yeah, you're just like the other guys we know. Now you can imagine the atmosphere that he walks into. Now remember, what is Nehemiah's attitude? They don't know that his heart was broken. They don't know that he had been praying. They don't know that all the things that he's going to do for that town. They don't know his attitude and his heart and his desires. They've judged him before he's even opened up his mouth. One of the very first things that Nehemiah does is this. He sets up a residence inside the city. What does that mean? It means this. He actually moved in with everybody else. Boy, wouldn't that be right? Hey, get out of Washington and come move back home and see how things are. He actually moved right in. Not only that, but in chapter 2, and I'm not reading, I'm just going to tell you the story. At nighttime, every night, he'd go out in the city and he'd look around and he'd see how terrible things were. And he would pray and he would pray and he would pray. Remember, his brother told him how bad everything was. But there he was, and he began to see it firsthand. And his heart was broken when his brother shared the news with him. But now he was there to see it. And oh, how he hurt him tremendously. This is what he found out. He had found out that his Jewish brothers and sisters were in such debt that they couldn't do anything if they wanted to. In other words, like this. He called them together in chapter 2. We're going to preach on chapter 2 one of these days. That's where Nehemiah shows the people his vision. Let me ask you a question. Do you have, as a Christian, as a member of this church, let me ask you a question. Do you actually have a vision for this church? What this church could be? Do you have a vision for what this church could become? If not, I challenge you to get one. Well, Nehemiah had a vision on what that wall could be, what those people could be. And in chapter 2, he basically does this. He shares that vision with those people. And he gets those people so charged up and ready to go. But hey, they don't have time to work on the wall. You know why? Because they're so indebted to these other people that they're out there trying to work just to make ends meet so they can make payments to the people that they sold out to. Because they're afraid if they missed one payment on that loan, they'd lose a house. Their wives would be sold into slavery. Their children would be sold into slavery. Now the sad part is this. The very people that owned the loan, you know what I'm talking about. You take out a loan to the bank owns the loan. The very people that they were indebted to were some of their own Jewish brothers. It was the previous administration. Some of those that were of the royal family years ago, that still had a little bit of money, that knew how to buy up land, and they had sold their souls to them. their own Jewish brothers. This is what Nehemiah does. Now, notice what he does. Nehemiah dips down into his own pocket and begins to go find out, okay, this family owes this much to this person. I'm going to pay their debt off. Boom. This family owes this much to this person. And he begins to use his own personal expense and some of the money King Artaxerxes sent with him, and he pays everybody's debt off. Now, why would he do that? Let me tell you why. So they would have time to work on the wall. Everything starts going good. Everything starts going good. And then all of a sudden these people that the Jewish people used to be indebted to, they thought, now wait a minute. Oh, Nehemiah, he's the money bag. Let's do this. If we can just get these people to be back in debt with us again, then old Nehemiah, he'll guarantee us that he'll pay their debt off again. So let's do that. So they went out and they tried their best to trick some of those Jewish people to becoming indebted again. I got some friends that filed for bankruptcy 2, 3, and 4 times. How you do that? Hello, listen to me. And these credit card companies can turn around and send them credit cards again. Now, if you're fool enough to sit right there and send someone a credit card that's filed bankruptcy 2 or 3 times, you deserve to fold and go under. You know, the best thing could happen to our nation years ago is to let some of these companies file for bankruptcy and go under. Hello? But we bailed everybody out but the taxpayer. Oh, excuse me, we're footing the bill. But notice, they got those people in debt again. Now, this is the story there in chapter 5. Here we are. Finally got the introduction out of the way. Let's start the message. Well, the introduction is the message. Now, look. He got the debt paid off. Now they got tricked, going back in debt again. And I call your attention to verse number 6. Look what it says. When Nehemiah found out what had happened. Remember, they were supposed to work on the wall. And they were working on the wall real good. I mean, they would sit right there and do their job. They might be working out there in their field. But then they had some extra time to work on the wall because they weren't indebted to anybody. Then they got indebted again. And that spare time they had, they couldn't use it to work on the wall anymore. And when Nehemiah found out what happened, the scripture says, I became very angry when I heard the outcry of these words. I was upset. Did he have a right to be upset? Let me ask you, American voter, are you angry today? I get a letter every once in a while from Rick Crawford. I'm fixing to fill his ear full. You ever get letters from your senators or your congressmen? If you don't, you ought to. And you ought to communicate back and forth. And I'll tell them scumbags what I'm going to think about them when I fill it off. Listen to me. If you really cared about us, quit getting us in debt. Now, wait a minute. Now, that's the national scene. Let's push it aside. Now, let's talk about the church scene. Have you become so indebted somewhere else that you don't have time to spend time worshiping? Hello. You don't have time to read your Bible.
Yes, I got to do that. Really?
I got to do that. Then who you become a slave to? You see what I'm talking about? And Nehemiah was very angry when he found out about this. What would make him angry? Well, we told you. But let me close by saying this. I like what verse number 7 says. Just the first part of it. The very first part, verse number 7. He says, then I consulted with myself. He said, I just consulted. You guys are ahead of me. I consulted with myself. Note this. You ever spoke sometime before you thought, that's an impossibility. But a lot of times we put our foot in our mouth. We say things and we say them in a hurry without thinking things through first, okay? He said, after serious thought, I really consulted. I really stopped and said, hey, this is what I've got to do. I forgot they got the New King James Version in front of them. That's what threw me off for just a minute. Sorry, boy. He said, I just stopped and I thought, okay, Nehemiah, let's think this thing over. I'm angry. I'm angry. I know what I want to do. I'm angry. Let me stop. Let me just consider what's going to happen. Who is he angry with? Well, look, you got two groups of people. You got the people he had just bailed out. Now they're in debt. You got the people that he had just paid off. Now they need to be paid off again. So he's angry. But you know who he's really angry with? He's angry with those rulers and those nobles that turn around and trick those people into being indebted to them again. And I've just got to read this before I close because it's so good. He said, first thing I did, I just called a big assembly together. Everybody show up at town meeting. I want everybody that is indebted to these nobles and these rulers to show up. And oh, by the way, nobles and rulers, you show up too. And the scripture says that he rebuked them. When's the last time our public officials have been rebuked instead of praised? I tell you what, for those that may be a Democrat, you'll rebuke the Republicans real quick. Those that are Republicans, you'll rebuke the Democrats real quick. But whatever happened when you look at things through the filters of your faith, that's just exactly what Nehemiah was doing. And he looked at those that were responsible for the problem, and he rebuked them. And he said, boys, tell you what you're going to do. You're going to pay back to those folks what you've been doing. We're a nation, and I like this. He says, we're a nation. It has been our history that when we borrowed from each other, we never charged interest to each other as Jewish people. I know it's not on the law. I know it's not a Mosaic law. I know you won't find it in the book of Leviticus. I understand that, but we had an agreement that Jews didn't charge Jews interest. But we charge interest to Gentiles. And now that your own people have been indebted to you, you're going to pay that back to them, and you're going to pay interest back to them for your punishment. And they said, we'll do it. Boy, wouldn't it be great if the president and congressman would all of a sudden be on C-SPAN saying, we're guilty, we spent your money the wrong way. Woo, that ain't going to happen. But wait a minute. That wasn't good enough for Nehemiah. He said, I don't believe you. You're a bunch of liars. I don't believe you. Bring in the priest. Bring in the religious folks. Let's get this thing down where we've got the eyes of God on this situation. Now you tell me what you're told them, and I want you to publicly confess it right before all these religious leaders what you're going to do. Now that's where the story ends today. Let's stop. As a Christian, does it not bother you that your grandchildren are going to suffer tremendously for things that are being done today? I stopped off, went to work yesterday. Now, I want to apologize if I've seemed just a little bit off my game. You know, yesterday morning was our audit. You say, well, what's an audit? Nothing major. You know, last year we had $8 million this year and 29 million pieces of inventory. This year we had 13 million, over 40 million pieces of inventory. I'm the guy that's responsible for it. So we had an audit yesterday morning. After we passed the audit, I went by Sam's to do something, and I walked in, and I had to take a second glance. I forget it was Halloween. One of the guys was behind the counter. I knew, well, I think he's a guy. He had a big mustache and a beard. But he had beautiful blonde hair, had a beautiful, beautiful blouse and skirt and high heels. And I had to say something. You can get away with that today. But you know what? That's no outfit today. You see that all the time. We're passing on to our generation the garbage that society is accepting today. Does that not bother you? Does that not break your heart to see that we are so afraid? You know, I've been following the story of this assistant football coach that's up in Washington, state of Washington. And they finally relieved him of his duties with paid. And you know why? You know why? Years before our girls even started it. The only thing I don't like about our girls saying the Lord's Prayer is just slow the thing down a little bit. Don't be ashamed. Take your time getting through with it. But what he would do after every football game, all by himself, he would just go to the field and kneel down. Pretty soon, some of his football players began to go out there with him. But it was just all him after the game. And then the school has released him of his duties this past week. For what? For expression of religious freedom? Is this what our nation has become? Does that not make you angry? Does that not break your heart to see the very principles that our nation was founded upon are being destroyed and taken away day after day after day? Nehemiah never understood what freedom was. Remember, he was born in captivity. All he had heard was the stories that had been passed on from previous generations. And yet when he saw it for firsthand, first thing happened, his heart was broken. When he saw the evilness of his own brothers, his own Jewish brothers, he became angry. But wait a minute. And then he consulted with himself. He consulted with himself and realized what he needed to do. And he confronted the very ones that were the problem makers. America needs a confrontation today. The Christian voter needs to make a statement today in America that we are a powerful force to be reckoned with. The Christian at Life Baptist Church need to make a statement today that we are a powerful force within this community. It starts right here. It starts right here.